Hello everyone. In this lecture, we have to discuss about transport of carbon dioxide in blood. Okay, as you know that carbon dioxide excel is essential for the ventilation. Okay, these are the learning objective of lecture. To know about carbon dioxide cascades, okay, and to understand various stages of carbon dioxide transport during exercise, and to know about oxygen dissociation curve and factor affecting oxygen dissociation curve. And this figure shows that how the uh, oxygen uptake and carbon dioxide elimination take place in the body. Okay, so you have to see that this is lungs. Okay, from where oxygen uptake take place. Okay, and through the alveoli, the oxygen entered into the pulmonary capillary by the diffusion. Okay, then it transport into the systemic artery. Okay, and then from the tissues the carbon dioxide release and oxygen consumed. Okay, and this carbon dioxide by the systematic veins entered into the pulmonary circulation. Okay, and from the pulmonary capillaries it release or eliminate uh, through the lungs or alveoli. Okay, so this figure shows the path of transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay, and this figure shows the movement of carbon dioxide against the down the concentration gradient. Okay, by the process of diffusion. Okay, and how this movement of CO2 take place down the concentration gradient. Okay, you have to see that in the systemic arterial blood, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 14. Okay, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in venous blood is 46. Okay, so you have to see that the blood which flow from pulmonary capillaries has partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 46. Okay, and in the air which present in the alveolus, the partial pressure of CO2 is 40. Okay, so in the pulmonary capillary partial pressure is 46, and in the alveolus the partial pressure of CO2 is 40. Okay, so you have to clearly see that the carbon dioxide flow from higher partial pressure of carbon dioxide to the lower partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. Okay, so this is called movement of carbon dioxide take place down the concentration gradient. Okay, so this figure clearly indicates that how the movement of CO2 carried down the concentration gradient. Okay, by the diffusion. and and what is the end product of aerobic respiration? You know that when the oxygen is consumed during the aerobic respiration or aerobic metabolism, the carbon dioxide release. Okay, and average 200 ml per minute carbon dioxide release in resting stage. Okay, while during exercise, this amount to increase up to 6 times. Okay, so the produced almost entirely in the mitochondria, because the oxidative uh, phosphorylation or aerobic respiration take place entirely in the mitochondria. That's why the carbon dioxide produced into the mitochondria. And importance of carbon dioxide elimination lies in the fact that ventilatory control system is more responsive to partial pressure of carbon dioxide changes. Okay, that's why it solely depends on the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Okay, and carbon dioxide is transported in the blood from the tissues in the three ways. Some of the carbon dioxide transport into the blood in dissolved form, and some of the carbon dioxide transport into the blood is buffered with water, okay, is carbonic acid, and some of the carbon dioxide transport into the blood into bound form and bound to protein, particularly hemoglobin, okay, and approx 75% of carbon dioxide is transported in the RBC cells in the bound form with the hemoglobin, and the rest of 25% of carbon dioxide transport in the dissolved form in the plasma that attributable to the lack of carbonic anhydrase in the plasma. Okay, and this is the reason why the less amount of carbon dioxide transport into the blood due to the carbonic anhydrase um, absent in the plasma, and plasma play a little role in buffering and formation with plasma protein. Okay, that's why the approximate 75% of carbon dioxide transport in RBC and only 25% transport in the dissolved form, and diffusion of carbon dioxide from the peripheral tissue cells into the capillaries, and from the pulmonary capillaries into the alveoli. Okay, so if you have to see in the figure, the diffusion of CO2 from the peripheral tissues cells um, diffuse into the capillaries or nearest capillary, and from the pulmonary capillaries it diffuse out into the alveoli, and intracellular partial pressure of CO2 is high, so carbon dioxide diffuse from the cells into the tissue capillary and is then carried by the blood to the lungs. Okay, and in the lungs it issues from the pulmonary capillaries into the alveoli and then expired from the lungs. Okay, and carbon dioxide diffuse in the direction opposite to the diffusion of oxygen. Okay, and carbon dioxide can diffuse about 20 times as rapidly as compared to the oxygen transport, and therefore the pressure difference required to cause carbon dioxide diffusion are less than the pressure difference required to cause oxygen diffusion. Okay, because carbon dioxide diffuse about 20 times rapidly as compared to the oxygen. This figure shows that diffusion carried down the concentration gradient. Okay, you have to see that the uptake of carbon dioxide by the blood in the tissue capillaries, okay, and the partial pressure of CO2 in the tissue cells is 46 mmHg, and partial pressure of the carbon dioxide in arterial and capillary, okay, 40, okay, and venous end of capillary is 45, okay. So as you know that carbon dioxide transport down the concentration gradient. Okay. So carbon dioxide from the tissue entered into the uh, blood that present in the capillary or that present in the veins. Okay. And the carbon dioxide pressure are approximately the following. The intercellular partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 46 mmHg, and interstitial partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45 mmHg. Thus, there is only a 1 mmHg pressure difference. Okay, and partial pressure of the arterial blood entering the tissue is 40 mmHg, and partial pressure of CO2 of the venous blood leaving the tissue is 45 mmHg. Okay, therefore the tissue capillaries blood comes almost exactly to the equilibrium with the interstitial partial pressure of carbon dioxide of 45 mmHg. Okay, So you have to see that diffusion of carbon dioxide from the pulmonary blood into the alveolus. Okay. So this is blood partial pressure of CO2. Okay. So you have to see that. Okay. And on x-axis alveolar carbon dioxide partial pressure. Okay. So this is arterial and partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and this is uh, pulmonary capillary blood partial pressure. Okay. So that's why the alveolus partial pressure of carbon dioxide 40 mmHg. Okay. That's why the carbon dioxide diffuse into the uh, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide to the low partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. Okay. And partial pressure of carbon dioxide of the blood entering the pulmonary capillary at the arterial end is 45 mmHg, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide of the alveolar air is 40 mmHg. Okay, so here only the 5 mmHg pressure difference that cause all the required carbon dioxide diffusion out of the pulmonary capillaries into the alveoli. Okay, so this difference in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is essential for the exhale of carbon dioxide out of the lungs, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide of the pulmonary capillary blood falls to almost exactly that equal to the alveolar partial pressure of carbon dioxide of 40 mmHg. Okay, so this figure shows that effect of rate of tissue metabolism and tissue blood flow on interstitial partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Okay, and you have to see that at normal case. Okay, this is the shape of the curve when the metabolism is normal. Okay, when uh, when someone undergo exercise, the metabolism suddenly increase, or when the metabolism increase approx 10 times as normal metabolism, the, the curve shift to the right direction, this one. And when the metabolism or normal metabolism is decreased or approx reach one fourth of the normal metabolism, the carbon dioxide curve shift toward left side. Okay, and the tissue metabolism or rate of tissue metabolism affect the flow of carbon dioxide into the blood. Okay, so this figure clearly indicates that the tissue metabolism that affect the blood flow in interstitial fluid. Okay, and a decrease in blood flow from normal, that is point A, to one quarter normal, that is point B, increase peripheral tissue partial pressure of carbon dioxide from the normal value of 45 mmHg to an elevated level of 60 mmHg. Okay, and increase the blood flow to six times normal, that is at the point C. If we compare, decrease the interstitial partial pressure of carbon dioxide from the normal value of 45 mmHg to 41 mmHg, and down to a level almost equal to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the arterial blood. Okay, that entering the tissue capillary. Okay, so this is called carbon dioxide transport homeostasis, and a tenfold increase in the tissue metabolic rate greatly elevated the interstitial fluid partial pressure of carbon dioxide at all rate of blood flow, where decreasing the metabolism to one fourth is normal metabolism causes the interstitial fluid partial pressure of carbon dioxide to fall to about 41 mmHg, that closely approaching the arterial blood partial pressure of carbon dioxide, which is 40 mmHg. Okay, so carbon dioxide, some of the carbon dioxide transport in the dual form. So carbon dioxide is 20 times more soluble than oxygen, hence it obey Henry laws, uh, which state that the number of molecule in solution is proportional to the partial pressure at the liquid surface. Okay, that's why partial pressure of CO2 into solubility coefficient equal to the carbon dioxide concentration that dissolve in the solution. So value depend upon the temperature, and temperature inversely affect the solubility of carbon dioxide, and more temperature is there, then less amount of carbon dioxide is being dissolved, and the carbon dioxide solubility coefficient is about 0.69 ml per liter mmHg at 37 degree. And at rest, the contribution of dual carbon dioxide to total arterial venous carbon dioxide concentration difference only 10%, and in absolute terms, only 3 ml of carbon dioxide per 100 ml of blood transport in the dual form. And during heavy exercise, the contribution of dual oxygen contribution of dissolved carbon dioxide increase up to sevenfold, and approximately one third of the total carbon dioxide exchange. And carbon dioxide is, that is 20 times more soluble than oxygen. Okay. So there is more effect also affect the transport of carbon dioxide into the blood. So a shift of the curve to the right in response to the increase in blood carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion has significantly affect the following condition: the enhance the release of oxygen from the blood in the tissue, and enhance the oxygenation of the blood in the lungs. So, so when the carbon dioxide increase in the blood, or hydrogen ion concentration increase the blood, the oxygen dissociation curve shift to the right direction. As the blood passes through the tissue, carbon dioxide diffuses from the tissue cells into the blood, and this increase the partial pressure of carbon dioxide into the blood, which in turn raise the blood carbonic acid and the hydrogen ion concentration, and these effects shift the oxygen dissociation curve to the right direction and downward direction. And in the lungs, the carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli, and this reduces the blood partial pressure of carbon dioxide and decrease the hydrogen ion concentration that shift the oxygen dissociation curve to the left direction and upward direction. Therefore, the quantity of oxygen that bind with the hemoglobin at any given alveolar partial pressure of oxygen become considerably increased, that allowing greater oxygen transport toward the tissues or cells. And as we know that the transport of carbon dioxide in the blood transport in three form. The only 7% of the carbon dioxide transport into the dissolved form. Okay, and approx 23% of carbon dioxide transport in the bound form, which is called carbaminohemoglobin, and 70% of the carbon dioxide transport as bicarbonate. Okay, so the transport of carbon dioxide in the dissolved state. So a small portion of carbon dioxide is transported in the dissolved state to the lungs. That approx 7% only, and transport of carbon dioxide in the form of bicarbonate ion. And this equation shows that how the carbon dioxide convert into the carbonic acid. And as you know that carbonic acid is a weak acid which dissociates into the hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. As carbon dioxide is generated in the tissue which diffuse freely into the venous plasma and then into the RBC. And in the RBC, carbon dioxide combined with water to form carbonic acid, and this reaction catalyzed by the carbonic anhydrase, and the carbonic anhydrase present in the RBC, and carbonic acid there dissociate into the hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion, and this bicarbonate ion leaves the RBC in exchange of chloride ion, and this exchange is called chloride shift, and is transported to the lungs in the plasma, and hydrogen ion is buffered inside the RBC by deoxyhemoglobin, because deoxyhemoglobin is a better buffer for hydrogen ion than oxyhemoglobin, and it is advantageous that hemoglobin has been deoxygenated by the time blood reaches the venous end of the capillaries, which is essential for oxygen and carbon dioxide transport. And in the lungs, all of the previous reaction occur in the reverse. And here, bicarbonate ion enters the RBC in exchange of chloride, and bicarbonate recombine with hydrogen ion to form bicarbonate carbonic acid, which decompose into the carbon dioxide and water. And carbon dioxide originally generated in the tissue is expired. And this figure shows that what happened at the level of tissue cells where carbon dioxide released during the aerobic respiration. Here, when the tissue release carbon dioxide, this carbon dioxide diffuse into the blood and dissolve into the plasma, and some of the carbon dioxide bind with the hemoglobin and form HbCO2 complex, and some of the carbon dioxide uh, in the RBC by the action of carbonic anhydrase converted to the carbonic acid, which dissociate into the hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion, and this hydrogen ion helps hemoglobin to become reduced. And what happened at the uh, site of lungs? Okay, so the just reverse reaction take place. You have to see that the dissolved carbon dioxide directly diffuse into the alveoli of the lungs, and the bicarbonate combined with the hydrogen ion form convert into the carbon dioxide and water by the action of carbonic anhydrase, and this carbon dioxide again diffuse into the lungs alveoli, and the carbon dioxide which bind with the hemoglobin again convert into the Hb plus CO2, and this carbon dioxide can diffuse into the alveoli. Now this free hemoglobin now bind with the oxygen, and in this way it transport oxygen toward the diffuse or cells. Okay, so this figure shows that what happened at the site of alveoli and what happened at the site of tissue. And you have to see that dissolved carbon dioxide in the blood react with water to form carbonic acid in the RBC. So in the RBC, the carbonic acid dissociate into the hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. And when the concentration of this ion, that is bicarbonate ion, increase in the red blood cells, then the bicarbonate ion diffuse out into the blood plasma. But hydrogen ion can't easily do this because cell membrane is impermeable to the cation. Therefore, to maintain electrical neutrality, the chloride ion move into the cells from plasma. Okay, and this process of shifting of chloride ion into the RBC while diffuse out of bicarbonate ion into the blood plasma is called chloride shift. Okay, that's why the band 3 bicarbonate and chloride ion carrier protein in the RBC membrane is found. And this figure shows that how the chloride shift will take place. And this is red blood cells where carbon dioxide diffuses into the RBC, where it converts into the carbonic acid by the action of carbonic anhydrase. And you know that carbonic acid is a weak acid, so that it dissociates into the bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ion. And here, the hydrogen ion helps to reduce the hemoglobin. Okay, and this helps to deliver oxygen into the blood. Okay, and now when the concentration of bicarbonate ion increase into the RBC, so it diffuse out into the plasma. Okay, and this process can affect the electrical neutrality of the blood. Therefore, to maintain electrical neutrality, the chloride ion diffuse into the RBC, and this process is called chloride shift. Okay, while you see that the hydrogen ion, the membrane for the cation is impermeable, so that hydrogen ion cannot diffuse out even there is high concentration of hydrogen ion. So it helps to unloading of oxygen, okay, at the uh, into the blood. Okay, so that's why here is two significance of chloride shift. The first to maintain electrical neutrality, and second to help in unloading of oxygen into the plasma. And most of the hydrogen ion combine with hemoglobin because reduced hemoglobin is less acidic and better proton acceptor. And this factor that deoxygenation of the blood increase its ability to carry out carbon dioxide is called Helden effect. As a result of the shift of chloride ion into the RBC and the buffering of hydrogen ion onto the reduced hemoglobin, the intracellular osmolarity increased slightly, and this results in water enters causing the cell to swell. This leads to increase in mean corpuscle volume. Okay, and hematocrit of venous blood is approx 3% higher than arterial blood, and venous RBC are more fragile. That's why, and chloride content of RBC in venous blood is higher as compared to the arterial blood. Okay, because of this process of dissociation of carbonic acid and chloride shift. And carbon dioxide bound as carbamate So 50 to 25% of total carbon dioxide transport uh, in a bound form, and carbon dioxide react directly with a terminal amino group of hemoglobin to form carbamino hemoglobin. Okay, and this is a reversible binding of carbon dioxide with hemoglobin. Okay, that's why whenever needed, uh, the hemoglobin can release carbon dioxide, and amount of carbon dioxide bound as carbamate to hemoglobin or plasma proteins depend on the following factors. First is oxygen saturation of hemoglobin, and second is hydrogen ion concentration. Okay, so during passage of blood through muscles and tissue, the oxygen saturation and hydrogen ion concentration change considerably during exercise, and and into the tissue where reduction of hemoglobin take place. It decrease oxygenation of heme that increase basicity of hemoglobin and increase hydrogen ion binding to the reduced hemoglobin, and this increase the dissociation of bicarbonate into the uh, hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion, and this increase the transport of carbon dioxide as bicarbonate ion. And in the lungs, oxygenation of hemoglobin increase the acidity of hemoglobin, and this uh, results in a decreased tendency to combine carbon dioxide to form HGBCO, and uh, this would enhance displacement of carbon dioxide from hemoglobin, and while acidity of hemoglobin increase, this decrease the hydrogen ion binding with the hemoglobin that favor release of hydrogen ion from hemoglobin results in increased formation of carbonic acid, ultimately release carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide pickup at the tissue level is transported into the blood to the lungs in three ways. The first is physically dual form, second is bound to hemoglobin, and third is a bicarbonate ion. And hemoglobin is present only in the red blood cell. H is a carbonic anhydrase, and the enzyme that catalyzes the production of bicarbonate ion. And the hydrogen ion generated during the production of bicarbonate ion also bind to hemoglobin, and the reaction that occur at the tissue level are reversed at the pulmonary level, where carbon dioxide diffuse out of the blood to enter the alveoli. Okay, and this figure is called carbon dioxide dissociation curve. Okay, so the carbon dioxide in the blood, okay, directly depend on the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Okay, and the normal operating range of carbon dioxide transport shown here. The normal operating range, and the curve show the normal blood partial pressure of carbon dioxide range between the limit of 40 mmHg in the arterial blood and 45 mmHg in the venous blood. There is a very narrow difference, and the normal concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood in all its different forms is about 50 volume percent, but only 4 volume percent of this is exchanged during normal transport of carbon dioxide from the tissue to the lungs, and the concentration rise to about 52 volume percent as the blood passes through the tissue, and falls to about 48 volume percent as it passes through the lungs. Okay, So it didn't happen that all the carbon dioxide that's present in the blood can diffuse out. Okay, so the difference amount of carbon dioxide is it diffuse out into the lungs, and the combination of oxygen with hemoglobin in the lungs causes the hemoglobin to become a stronger acid, and this displaces the carbon dioxide from the blood into the alveoli. Okay, as we know that carbon dioxide diffuse out down the concentration gradient. Okay, and certain condition affect the uh, carbon dioxide dissociation curve. Okay, so the carbon dioxide dissociation curve relates partial pressure of carbon dioxide to the amount of carbon dioxide that carried in the blood. Okay, so the total carbon dioxide carries in the blood depend on the three blood parameter. The first is partial pressure of carbon dioxide, second is plasma pH, and third is partial pressure of oxygen. All three parameters affect the carbon dioxide transport into the blood. And as you have to see that when the 0% HbO2 is there, the oxygen CO2 dissociation curve follow this path. Okay, and when the 75% HbO2 present in the blood, the carbon dioxide dissociation curve follow this path, and when the 97.5% HbO2 is there, the carbon dioxide dissociation curve follow this path. Okay, so this shows that hemoglobin is much affected by the state of oxygenation of hemoglobin and less affected by the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. As lower the saturation of hemoglobin with the oxygen, larger the carbon dioxide concentration for a given partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Okay, and carbon dioxide curve is shifted to the right by increase in the oxygen saturation (SpO2), and carbon dioxide content rise throughout the increase in partial pressure, and oxygen content rise more steeply until a point at which the hemoglobin is fully saturated. And after the increase is small because the small increase amount in the solution that result in the carbon dioxide curve is more linear than the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So this figure shows that the difference between the content that present in the blood of oxygen and carbon dioxide with the change in the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and oxygen delivery from lungs to the tissue is a major function of the circulation to transport oxygen from the lungs to the peripheral tissue at a rate that satisfies overall oxygen consumption. That's why the pulmonary ventilation uh, achieved, and under the normal resting condition, the dissolved oxygen is much higher as compared to the venous oxygen. Okay, so now you have to attempt quiz. So, which of the following reaction take place at the pulmonary capillaries? As we have to discuss that at pulmonary capillaries, the uh, Hb plus O2 to form HbO2. Okay, it is clearly indicate that hemoglobin carry oxygen. Okay, and combined with the oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. Okay, while this reaction carbon dioxide plus water, this reaction take place into the RBC, and Hb plus CO2 that form HbCO2, and this reaction take place in the blood, and Hb plus Hin that form Hb and reduce hemoglobin. This reaction takes place at RBC. So the correct option is A. And the following question indicate the partial pressure of oxygen and partial pressure of carbon dioxide relationship in gas exchange. Okay. So the first question is partial pressure of oxygen in the blood entering the pulmonary capillary is less than, higher, or equal to the partial pressure of O2 in the alveoli. As we have to discuss that the oxygen and carbon dioxide transport take place down the concentration gradient. That's why the partial pressure of O2 in the blood that entering the pulmonary capillary is lower than the partial pressure of oxygen into the alveoli. Okay, and partial pressure of CO2 in the blood that entering the pulmonary capillaries is higher than partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the alveoli, and partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli is equal to the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood leaving the pulmonary capillaries, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the alveoli is equal to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood leaving the pulmonary capillaries, and partial pressure of oxygen in the blood leaving the pulmonary capillary is equal to the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood that entering the systemic capillaries, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood leaving the pulmonary capillary is equal to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood that entering the systemic capillaries, and partial pressure of oxygen in the blood entering the systemic capillary is lower than partial pressure of oxygen in the tissue cells, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood that entering the systemic capillary is lower than partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the tissue cells, and partial pressure of oxygen in the tissue cells is approximately equal to the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood that leaving the systemic capillaries, and partial pressure of CO2 in the tissue cells is approximately equal to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood that leaving the systemic capillary, and partial pressure in the blood leaving the systemic capillary is equal to the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood entering the pulmonary capillaries, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood leaving the systemic capillaries is equal to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood that entering the pulmonary capillaries. Okay, so thank you everyone.